South India's #1 travel brand. You know you are special when you're with GT Holidays.
Milky Mist Paneer. Milky Mist Paneer.
Hello and welcome to Galatta Plus. In this video review episode, we're going to be talking about Netflix's Spanish miniseries 100 Years of Solitude. This is as good as it gets in terms of adapting a great but difficult novel into cinematic form. The makers do not try to duplicate the prose, and the situations are not exoticized. The lovely words are complemented by lovely, unfussy imagery that makes us feel the magical realism. The magic appears as casual, as inevitable as the realism. The rest of this review may contain spoilers, so do watch at your own discretion. Arundhati Roy said that she would never sell the rights of a Booker Prize winning novel, The God of Small Things, to a filmmaker. This was her explanation. She said, "Every reader has a vision of the novel in his or her head, and I do not want it to be fashioned into one film. A lot of Hollywood producers approached me, but I do not want to sell the adaptation rights for any amount of money. I do not want the novel to be colonized by one imagination." What a beautiful thought that is, that the vast and varied independence of a novel should not be colonized by one imagination. After all, the interiority of the novel is fundamentally at odds with the exteriority of cinema. The images in our heads as we read prose are half-formed. We see the people, the places, and yet we don't. A playful form of malleability is at work here, and it vanishes the minute we see an actor in the part, or we see the setting so vulgar in its finality. Our capacity to participate in the proceedings is diminished. Of course, cinema has its own kind of interiority in its pauses and in its approximations of thoughts that we can no longer read about to decipher, but we are allowed this participation only after a certain amount of colonization has already occurred. We are now subjects of the imaginations of the actors, the director, the technicians. With the book, on the other hand, we are the imaginers. Anyway, like Arundhati Roy, the Colombian Nobel Prize winning author Gabriel Garcia Marquez did not think much of making books into movies. In an interview, he said, "I can't think of any one film that improved on a good novel, but I can think of many good films that came from very bad novels." At the time, he might have anticipated Mike Newell's severely misjudged take on Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, which was released to terrible reviews and terrible box office. But times have changed. We are now in the age of the miniseries, where time can flow as extensively as it did in Marquez's words and Marquez's worlds. And thus we come to the Spanish adaptation on Netflix of 100 Years of Solitude, the 1967 novel that intertwines the history of the mythical town of Macondo with the history of the Buendia family. This is a 16-episode adaptation, and the first 8 are available now, and it's as good as it can get. First, the makers do not try to duplicate the prose. As many readers may remember, the opening lines of the book are these: "Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. At that time, Macondo was a village of 20 adobe houses built on the bank of a river of clear water that ran along a bed of polished stones, which were white and enormous like prehistoric eggs." That's the first few lines. In the book, in these first few lines, the town of Macondo has already been founded. In the miniseries directed by Alex Garcia Lopez and Laura Mora, the founding of this town happens midway through the first episode, and though we get the line about prehistoric eggs, it occurs elsewhere. Before we get to the opening line of the book, we get the opening images of birth and death, rot and renewal. We get faded old photographs, insects running riot, a corpse next to a cradle, and only then do we get the fantastic face of Claudio Cattaneo as Colonel Aureliano Buendia facing that firing squad. 100 Years of Solitude is not an easy book to read, and the makers of the miniseries do not attempt to mirror that difficulty with on-screen complexity. This story is linearized. The gypsies from the book's first paragraph appear only after Jose Arcadio Buendia and his cousin Ursula Guaran get married, and Jose kills a man, and then he leaves the village in search of the sea and stops somewhere and decides to call the place Macondo. What happens to the Buendias and to Macondo across generations forms the rest of this wonderfully strange story. The lovely words are complemented by lovely, unfussy imagery that makes us feel the magical realism. The situations are not exoticized. The magic is as casual, as inevitable as the realism. In the book, Marquez writes, "In his youth, Jose Arcadio Buendia and his men, with wives and children, animals, and all kinds of domestic implements, had crossed the mountains in search of an outlet to the sea, and after 26 months they gave up the expedition and founded Macondo so they would not have to go back. Now this passive voice passage is transformed into active voice with a mix of the narrator speaking and the character speaking. Jose Arcado Buendia looks at Ursula and says, "We will cross the mountains until we reach the ocean." And they look down and we see waves where there had been dry earth. The character's words become the visual. The constant exchange between the narrator's voice and the character's voices is beautifully done. When a young man loses his virginity to an older woman, Marquez writes of the smell of smoke that she had under her armpits. That sort of thing is good to hear and good to read, but to listen to it as a narrator says it might have become too literal. Here instead the character himself says, "Her skin smells like smoke," and he blows out a candle. The wick gives off smoke, whose smell, we presume, reminds him of the woman. But what about 100 Years of Solitude as a standalone watch without comparisons to the book? Well, it's not an easy novel, and the series similarly isn't exactly an easy watch. Magical elements like a plague of insomnia and people returning from the dead intermingle with very realistic aspects like the struggles of parenting or the pain of longing and love. The politics and history and culture of Latin America coexist with the soap operatic touches like a love triangle with sisters or a couple raising the bastard child of their son as their own. The sealed-off nature of Macondo brushes against the gradual intrusion of an external government which issues orders like all houses have to be painted blue. But what the filmmakers have done is something remarkable. They have found a cinematic equivalent to hold these various elements together, just like the novel's dense prose glued the whimsical little parts into one giant organic whole. Despite having to cover vast amounts of events and information, the story space is unhurried. The events may be dreamlike, but the locations, the sets are brilliantly real. They root the story in a tangible physicality, even when a priest begins to float in the air. The background score is otherworldly and, more importantly, minimal. There is a lost in time quality to the series, and this might not have been possible to achieve with non-stop music. The camera drifts and flows a lot like time or like rivers of memory, sweeping along the events in motion. The unknown faces, at least to me, come with no baggage, and the brilliant actors instantly become the parts they play. Like the book 100 Years of Solitude needs a bit of patience, it needs you to stick with it, but as with the book, the rewards are many. 100 Years of Solitude is proof that a great novel may not make a great movie, but it definitely can become a rock-solid miniseries. By the end of these 8 episodes, I wanted to read the story of the Buendias all over again. And that's it about 100 Years of Solitude. If you like this video review, do subscribe to Galatta Plus and see you soon at the movies.
South India's #1 travel brand. You know you are special when you're with GT Holidays.
Milky Mist Paneer. Milky Mist Paneer.